Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings MLB Benny's Bats edition for Wednesday, April 13th. It's a big night in daily fantasy. We have a 12-game slate and quite a few contests on tap today. So let's get right into it so we can get all the information done. Basically, the idea here of our Benny's Bats section is I try to go through each pitcher that's on the mound. We try to talk about what their weaknesses have been, and then figure out which batters on the other side profile to do the best against them. So let's start right at the top. We got the San Diego and Philly game. Got Jared Eckhoff, the young right-hander, going for the Phillies. Left-handed bats have done better against him. Hit 268 against him with a 1.48 whip last year, and they had 4 home runs in 20 innings. Now, we do only have limited innings for Eckhoff in the majors, so not a huge sample size to look at, but left-handed bats have been the way to attack him. Look at that San Diego team, though, and there aren't a lot of left-handed bats that you would even consider putting in a lineup. Corey Spangenberg is probably the best one up top. He's batting second most of the time for the San Diego team. The only other guy that makes some sense is power-hitting Brett Wallace, and he's not really a great player either. He did have the best numbers against right-handed pitching last year. So those would be the two guys that I would look at if I was looking to take anybody against Eckhoff. But honestly, this San Diego offense is not very good, so I wouldn't even be opposed. And I'm looking forward to reading, Josh's pitching thoughts for today, because I bet you he probably has Eckhoff on that list because, like I said, this San Diego team is just really not all that good with the bats. On the other side of this game, we have Colin Rea, right-handed pitcher, limited Major League Baseball innings. And again, nothing that I see in those limited innings is really all that good. Right-handed and left-handed bats have both been able to get it off him. Maikel Franco, probably the best of the right-handed bats to use, 360 WOBA, 213 ISO score. The left-handed bats, I mean, I guess you can look at guys like Ryan Howard, Odubel Herrera, maybe Cesar Hernandez leading it off if he can get on and steal a base. As you can see, I mean, I'm kind of struggling with this game because both of these offenses are pretty bad. I mean, Robbie Erlin, who hasn't really shown us much of anything in the major leagues. Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm a little under the weather today. Robbie Erlin and Charlie Martin yesterday basically came out and had a pitcher's duel. And I think it had less to do with the fact that both of these guys are stud pitchers and more to do with the fact that the lineups that they were both facing are just kind of bad. So, if you want to use a lot of guys in this game, feel free. I really don't think it's probably one of the best games to target, though. Next game we have is the New York Yankees at the Toronto Blue Jays. Michael Pineda going up for the Yankees. Pineda's been very up and down, erratic, and kind of hard to gauge in his career. Last year, left-handed bats 272 with the 125 whip against them. Right-handed bats 283 with the 120 whip against them, which is really the more important number against this Toronto Blue Jays team. Now, I would have thought that the Blue Jays had a really good history against Pineda with, the numbers that we just talked about here. But really, the only guy who's hit him well has been Edwin Encarnacion. Encarnacion, 399 WOBA, 294 ISO score last year. Lifetime, he's 7 of 22 off of Michael Pineda with 1 home run, which is by far the best of all the power hitters on this Blue Jays team. Now, we know the Blue Jays do hit lefties better, but this is an amazing offense. They hit right-handed pitching very well, too, especially at their home up in Toronto. But listen to these stats. Kevin Pillar, their leadoff hitter, 1 for 10 lifetime against Pineda. Tulowitzki, 0 for 1 lifetime against Pineda. Jose Bautista, 3 for 19 lifetime against Pineda, although 2 of those 3 were home runs. Josh Donaldson, 0 for 10 lifetime against Pineda. So I would have thought with the numbers that Pineda had and the fact that, he struggles in righty on righty and this game being up in Toronto, I would have thought that this is a great spot for the Toronto Bats, even with me being a Yankees fan. But after looking at the numbers, I have a little bit of pause. So other than Edwin Encarnacion, I think the rest of it's kind of up in the air. I don't know if I would really want to use any of these Toronto guys. Sure, they all profile well. They all have, over 360 WOBAs and over 200 ISO scores. But, like I said, just looking at what they've done against Pineda in the past, it gives me a little bit of pause here today. Now, on the other side of this game, we have the lefty J.A. Happ going for the Toronto Blue Jays. He's given up about a 260 batting average to both sides of the plate over the last 2 years. So you can probably attack him either way. Obviously, the right-handed bats are the ways that I'm going to try to go. And there's really only two guys on the Yankees who are right-handed bats that hit left-handed pitching well. A-Rod's at the top of that list with a 389 WOBA, 269 ISO score. You know, he does have power, and Toronto is a good home run hitter's ballpark. So I think he's a sneaky option you can look at today for a little bit of a discount at third base. The other guy is the rookie, not the rookie, but the guy that just brought over in Aaron Hicks. 375 WOBA, 188 ISO score. Again, I mean, I'm not even sure if he's going to be in the lineup or not. You know, with A-Rod basically only able to play DH, you know, these guys all have to find some spots in the outfield. So, you know, do you take out Beltran? Do you take out Ellsbury? Do you sit Brett Gardner? You know, Gardner was the one who sat earlier in the year in order to get a right-handed bat in there. So my guess would be that would probably be the way the Yankees go today. So just be careful if you're somebody who likes to use Brett Gardner as well. Next game we can talk about Atlanta against Washington. Got Steven Strasburg going for Washington. Not really looking to target too many guys against him. You know, Strauss is a pretty good pitcher. You know, he's had his ups and downs, but I mean, even on his downs, he's still pretty solid. The one guy I think we do need to talk about, though, is Freddie Freeman. Against right-handed pitching, 390 WOBA, 232 ISO score. But more importantly, directly against Strasburg, 12 of 31 lifetime with 3 home runs. So for those of you who are big BVP guys, I think you get him a little bit lower on today. I don't think a lot of people are going to be chasing him. I think that, you know, I think that Strasburg's going to be one of the higher owned pitchers. So that'll pretty much keep people off of most of the bats on that Atlanta team. I mean, that Atlanta team is not good. That's not a very good offense. There's not a lot there. The one guy they do have, though, is Freddie Freeman. And Freeman's numbers are very good lifetime against Steven Strasburg. So I do think that's somebody you got to take a look at. Now, on the other side of that game, we got Matt Whistler pitching for Atlanta. Left-handed bats hit 327 against them last year, had a whip of 1.97, hit 10 home runs in 48 innings. So left-handed power bats is the one to attack this guy. Well, he's playing Washington, so, I mean, Bryce Harper kind of jumps the page at you as a left-handed power bat that you're trying to have to use. He's very likely to be one of the highest owned guys today, completely stands out. Not the greatest hitter's ballpark. With his power, I don't really think that matters. He's got a 478 WOBA, 354 ISO score. Those are huge numbers. Definitely puts him in play. Other left bat you got to look at, even though he's getting a little bit pricey, is probably Daniel Murphy. I don't like paying up for him. He does hit pretty well, with the exception of that barrage of home runs he hit for the Mets at the end of last year. He's not much of a power hitter, though. He's more of a guy who hits average, gets on base. He's a very solid hitter. I don't mean to kind of knock Daniel Murphy's skill by any stretch of the imagination. He's a very good player, very good left-handed bat, but he's not really a power bat, which is kind of what Whistler usually struggles with. Although with the 327 batting average, I mean, any lefty is typically in play against them. Next game we can talk about, Detroit and Pittsburgh. We got Ryan Vogelsong going up for Pittsburgh. Now, I was never a big fan of this guy when he was in San Francisco, but for some reason, when guys come over to Pittsburgh, they magically become, you know, solid pitchers. So I'm taking a little bit of a wait-and-see approach with him. Left-handed bats do better against him, 283, 161 whip. The problem is we don't really have any left-handed bats on the Detroit Tigers. They do have a lot of right-handed bats and a lot of right-handed bats that hit right-handed pitching well. So the split I was really looking at is, you know, Vogelsong against right-handed bats last year. 251 batting average, 136 whip. So not as good as it was with the left-handed bats, but I mean, still a very, very solid number that you can attack. You know, the usual suspects are the guys that I'd be looking at. Miguel Cabrera, 408 WOBA, 186 ISO. J.D. Martinez, 369 WOBA, 248 ISO. Justin Upton, 362 WOBA, 227 ISO. All three guys are right-handed bats, righty-on-righty situations. All three guys hit pretty well against right-handed pitching. It's not a very good hitter's park for them here in Pittsburgh. So even though it makes a lot of sense to be like, oh, we're going to stack against Vogelsong today, I don't really think it's the greatest spot to do it. I think all those guys are a little bit expensive as well. Would I use one or two of them on some of my tournament rosters? Absolutely. Would I stack up Detroit? Most likely no, because I don't usually like to stack up teams playing in Pittsburgh. It's not the greatest part, you know, conducive to score a lot of runs. And, you know, again, it's all righty-on-righty matchups, and really you want to use left-handed bats to attack Vogelsong, and Detroit just really doesn't have any lefties. Now, the other side of this game, you got Shane Green pitching. Left-handed bats last year hit 363 against them. Right-handed bats 242. The His whip against lefties was above 2. He had a couple good starts and then a couple really bad starts. Kind of fell off the map with an injury for a little while. Let's see. On Spur, I think you can look at a guy like Jaso being off for them. 358 Woba, 180 ISO score. He makes a little bit of sense to me. McCutcheon, I think, is in play. 376 Woba, 200 ISO score. Again, he's better. He's a righty, and we usually like to attack Green with lefties, but, in the middle of that order, Clutch is the best hitter that they have, and he does pretty well in righty-on-righty matchups anyway. Some of the other left-handed bats I think you can look at. Gregory Polanco is obviously somebody who's in play. He's had a decent start to the year. And the sneaky cheap option who I want to mention is actually Matt Joyce. In the last 2 games, Matt Joyce has hit third, and then yesterday he led off. He is one of the better left-handed bats that they do have here, and Shane Green did struggle with those left-handed bats. So I think that Matt Joyce is definitely somebody who can be a sneaky salary saver for you. He does have a little bit of upside. Again, the same thing I just said about those Detroit bats. Pittsburgh's not the greatest hitter's ballpark, so I wouldn't be looking for huge upside out of him. But again, for the price that he's at, he might be that cheap guy that you need in order to fit in a little bit better pitching, or maybe to get a little bit of a bigger bat in at one of the positions that you had to go cheap in order to make things work. So I do like Matt Joyce. I do think he's one of the better value plays on the day, depending on where they have him in the lineup. If they're hitting him first, if they're hitting him third, I think he's somebody you can look at. If they put him in there and they hit him 7th or 8th, it's not going to be as appealing, obviously. Next game we can talk about, one that I know everybody's waiting to hear about, San Francisco at Colorado. We got Jake Peavy going up for Colorado, and Peavy for the last 2 years has basically been a reverse splits kind of guy. So right-hand that's hit 271 against him last year with a 123 whip. And left-handers were really struggled, only a 207 batting average with a 102 whip. I still think a guy like Cargo is in play, although he doesn't have great numbers lifetime against Peavy. 0 for 7 lifetime, even though he has a 450 Woba and a 352 ISO against right-handed pitching. So just be careful. I don't think Cargo is the slam dunk today that a lot of other people do. He hasn't really hit Peavy well over his career, even though the Peavy now is not the same Peavy that he might have faced a few years back. On the other side, though, if you're looking for a righty-on-righty matchup that does profile very well against Peavy, Nolan Arenado is one of the better righty-on-righty hitters we do have in the game. 388 Woba, 318 ISO for him. He's 5 of 11 lifetime for Peavy with a home run. So I'm not a huge proponent of BVP. I don't use the tell-all, end-all like a lot of other people do. But I do like taking a look at it when the numbers kind of show you that he should be a guy that profiles well against Jake Peavy, and then you look at the numbers and you see, well, he should profile well. Oh, he's 5 of 11 lifetime with a home run. Yeah, that's a pretty good situation. So I really do like Nolan Arenado, probably my favorite play out of anybody in this San Francisco-Colorado game here. Definitely going to have some exposure to him at third base. On the other side of this game for Colorado, they're throwing Jordan Lyles up there. Basically, everybody hit him last year. Left-handed bats had the higher batting average in a limited sample. But like I said, lefties, righties, it really didn't matter. This guy was giving it up to everybody, especially at home in Coors. So, guys like Span, Panic, Posey, Belt, all the way up at the top of that order, they're all guys that are in play. My favorite play on this team is probably Hunter Pence, though. 370 Woba, 216 ISO against right-handed pitching. But he is 4 of 12 lifetime with a home run against Lyle. So he's somebody that sees the ball well against him. Definitely think he's probably my favorite play. So Arenado as far as the Colorado goes, and then Hunter Pence as far as San Francisco goes. But I do think Lyles is a very weak pitcher. If you want to go with Span and Panic and Posey and Belt and Pence, make sure that Posey's in the game. He sat out yesterday after fouling a ball off his foot, listed as day-to-day. But if all these guys are playing, I think all these guys can be in. I do think San Francisco is a viable stack. Road team at Coors is always a viable stack. And like I said, Lyles is a pretty weak pitcher. I think it will be popular, though, so you're probably not going to be the only one stacking up all the San Francisco Giants today. Now, next game I want to talk about, we got Arizona and the LA Dodgers. Alex Wood, former Atlanta Brave, is on the mound for the Dodgers here. Right-handed bats hitting 297 with a 151 whip against him. That kind of points out 2 guys who I really like here. First guy, Paul Goldschmidt, obviously. 455 Woba, 256 ISO against left-handed pitching. He's also 4 for 9 lifetime with 2 home runs against Alex Wood. So I definitely think he's a very viable option. Definitely somebody you got to look at. Yes, he's expensive. I think he's 52 or 5,300 over on DraftKings. Might be the most expensive first baseman. I think him and Rizzo were up there at the top. I forget which one's 52 and which one's 53, but definitely in play. Definitely a guy who should mash today, and definitely a guy who could put up a huge number. The other right-handed bat that I like there is actually the catcher, Beef Wellington Castillo. 331 WOBA, 228 ISO score, 2 for 5 lifetime against Alex Wood with a home run as well. So both of these guys have already shown that they can do it. Both of these guys profile to do pretty well against them. You know, other guys you can look at. I also like a guy like Nick Ahmed. If he's in there and he's getting a start towards the top of the order, he's got pretty good WOBA and ISO numbers, as well as some lifetime stats against Alex Wood. So I think he's the other guy that I take a look at. Now, on the other side of this game, we have Ruby De La Rosa going up against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Left-handed bats last year, 315 average, 175 whip, 20 home runs, and 87 at-bats against De La Rosa. So the guy who stands out to me most, Corey Seager at 3,900, is just – he's an absolute steal at that price. So I'm going to have a lot of him. He had a 437 WOBA, 259 ISO score last year against right-handed pitching. I think he was 2 for 2 in his only 2 at-bats against Ruby De La Rosa. So I think he's in line for a big game here today. You can look at any of the left-handed bats, really. You know, Adrian Gonzalez makes a little bit of sense, although his numbers haven't been great against De La Rosa lifetime. He's a decent option. I don't know if I'd pay up for him today, and there's definitely a lot of first basemen that I like. So, you know, Adrian Gonzalez is definitely not somebody who I'm going to have a lot of exposure to, but he does make sense as a left-handed bat against De La Rosa. Guy who I really like, if you're looking to save some money and get somebody who I think will be a little bit lower owned, this is a great spot for Jock Peterson here. Now, Peterson is a left-handed power bat. He basically has a ton of power. He also strikes out a decent amount, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is a 1-for-4 game with a home run and 2 strikeouts for him, but I do really like him for that 1 home run here today. Like we said, De La Rosa, 20 home runs allowed in 87 innings, 315 average to left-handed bats. You know, Peterson's a guy that is getting playing time now because you got Crawford injured, you got Ethier still out, and now you have Van Slyke out as well. So they're basically down to, you know, like Jock Peterson and Trace Thompson playing kind of like a righty-lefty platoon split. So when the right-hander's on the mound, definitely like Jock Peterson here. If a lefty does come in later on in the game, there is always the chance that he gets pinch hit for Thompson. But I think if I can get 3 at-bats out of him against Ruby De La Rosa for cheap, I'd still be willing to take it. And, like I said, I think this is a pretty good matchup for him. So Jock Peterson, keep that name in mind when you're filling out your lineups today if you're looking for a cheap guy that has the power upside that we need. Obviously, Peterson is a hit-or-miss kind of play. I really like the spot for him here today, but I still would probably only use him in a tournament. I don't really trust him in cash games. He can go out and have a 4-strikeout game as we saw him do last year. Next game I want to talk about here, KC against Houston. Yordano Ventura on the mound for KC. Left-handed bats hit 255 against them with the 135 whip. Right-handed bats 240 with the 124 whip. So nothing spectacular, but nothing great either. Looking at the guys on the other team, I mean, I guess you can look at guys like Rasmus and Springer and, maybe an Altuve. Carlos Correa is probably the guy who profiles the best. 360 WOBA, 220 ISO score last year. One of the best hitting shortstops in the game. We talk about him all the time. Batting third, something you don't find a lot of shortstops doing, hitting in that 3-hole. So he's definitely a viable option. The long shot option, the sneaky play that I want to mention as well, Jason Castro, the catcher for the Houston Astros. Numbers don't really point anything out that all that crazy, but he is 4 for 8 lifetime against Ventura. As we said, Ventura does struggle more with the left-handed bats. Castro is one of those left-handed bats that kind of flies under the radar. He's pretty cheap today. I think he's only around $3K or so on DraftKings. And again, we talked about it. You got guys like Brian McCann, who's banged up and may not play. You got Posey, who's day-to-day, may not play. You got Schwarber, who's already out for the season. You look at DraftKings today, those are the 3 highest-priced catchers. So I don't think we're going to find any, stud catchers today. I think you're going to have to figure out which of the cheaper options you want to roll out there. There are some solid guys in the $3,200 to $3,500 range right there. But, you can go even a little bit lower and get a guy like Castro. Like I said, 4 for 8 lifetime, playing at home in Houston, good hitters ballpark, going up against a guy in Ventura who struggles a little bit with left-handed bats. So things do kind of make a little bit of sense. You can look at the other left-handed bats, but I didn't think any of them really had good numbers against Ventura lifetime. And it's not like Ventura is a bad pitcher that we really want to target, but you got guys like Valbuena, you got guys like Preston Tucker, Kobe Rasmus, all those left-handed bats would be in play. Now, on the other side of this game, we have Scott Feldman. Right-handed bats, righty on righty, has been the way to attack Feldman. Last year, right-handed bats, 294 batting average, 1.39 whip. The lefties on the Royals have actually struggled with Feldman, so he was surprisingly good against this Kansas City team in 2015. So even though if you look at the numbers, when you look at left-handed bats against right-handed pitching, Hosmer, Morales, Moustakas, those are the guys that are going to stick out, but they haven't really done well against Feldman, and Feldman kind of had their number last year. The only guy that I'm really looking at here, righty on righty, is Lorenzo Cain. Now, Lorenzo Cain is not normally a guy that smashes righty on righty, although he isn't bad. I don't want to say he's bad in righty on righty situations, but he obviously hits much better against left-handed pitching. But against Feldman, he seems to kind of have Feldman's number. 7 of 13 lifetime against Scott Feldman. So I think Lorenzo Cain is probably the one guy I would look at. Great hitters ballpark down here in Houston, and because it's a righty on righty matchup, I think he's going to go very low owned. So Lorenzo Cain, definitely somebody I want to have some shares of. I think he can be a great tournament option that gives you upside. So we're a little more than halfway done here. We got Milwaukee and St. Louis is the next game. Mike Leake is on the mound for St. Louis, and I actually like Leake as a pitcher a little bit here today. Left-handed bats have kind of been the way to go against him. 263 average he gave up to them last year with a 126 whip, 10 home runs in 73 innings. So not really all that horrible. He was a lot tougher on right-handed bats last year, which, is what you would think of from a right-handed pitcher. If you look at that Milwaukee team, though, they don't really have any big left-handed bats. I mean, the biggest left-handed bat they had last year was Adam Lind, and they lost him. Basically everybody else is kind of right-handed. Scooter Gannett and Jonathan Villar are probably the two best left-handed bats that they have. Both guys should find themselves up at the top of the order, and neither guy is really scaring me all that much. The best hitter they have against right-handed pitching is actually Ryan Braun, who had about a 350 WOBA last year and a 200 ISO score against right-handed pitchers in righty-on-righty situations. But he hasn't really done all that well against Leake in his career. So, like I said, I'm trying to find somebody. I think you can. Leake is a decent pitcher. I don't think he's a lights-out kind of pitcher. But because of the matchup here with Milwaukee, I actually think he's in a pretty good spot. So Leake is somebody who I think I'd rather use today than target bats against. Although I'm not using him in cash, I don't think, at this moment. But again, you never know. With the way the pricing's been, you need to find some of those cheaper pitchers in order to make your roster work. $8,000 isn't exactly rock bottom, but I do think I expect a good game out of Leake today. On the other side of the mound, we have Chase Anderson pitching. Chase Anderson, right-hander from Milwaukee. He was a guy who was with Arizona last year, for those of you who remember. Right-handed bats actually have a higher average against them at 280, but it's not like he's been lights out to lefties. They're hitting 265 against him too. So basically can look at guys from either side of the plate. Matt Carpenter is the one who stands out the most for me against right-handed pitching. 398 WOBA, 251 ISO. Has started the season a little slow for himself, but he's a guy at the top of the order that gets on base a lot, scores a lot of runs. He's a very, very solid leadoff man. Doesn't have the, normal leadoff man, stolen base kind of skills that you would expect, but a guy that has a WOBA that high and a non-base percentage that high, he does walk, he does hit, he makes contact, rarely strikes out. Really, really solid guy to have in your lineup. Really a big fan of Matt Carpenter, for those of you who don't know. Two other guys I think we can look at, Randall Gierchuk, 381 WOBA, 274 ISO. If he's there in the lineup, big things are expected out of him, and he's kind of struggled a little bit to start the year. But I think he will eventually bounce back. My biggest concern is where they do hit him in the lineup. Like we said, Chase Anderson gave up a higher batting average to right-handed bats, so I think you can look at some of these right-handed bats as well. The other guy is off to a pretty good start this year, Stephen Piscotty, 363 WOBA, 190 ISO score. And then if you're looking for a cheap option, I haven't looked at his price yet today, but Hazelbaker has been hitting second for this St. Louis team, and he's been doing pretty well. He's got a couple home runs, getting on base, getting some hits. I think he might even have a stolen base or two in there. So this is a solid option. This is a guy that they're rolling out there game after game. If he's going to be hitting behind Matt Carpenter in that 2-hole there, in front of the bigger bats behind them, like, the Holidays and the Garchucks and, either the Brandon Moss or the Matt Adams, whoever they decide to roll out there with. I think he's another guy that you have to kind of take a look at here. So somebody else that would be in play for that St. Louis team. I do think St. Louis scores a couple runs here today. So that would be another team that you can stack up if you want to. Although I don't know if they get to, the 10 or 9 or 10 runs that you really need in order to have a chance to, take down a tournament with the St. Louis stack. Next game I want to talk about, Cincinnati at the Chicago Cubs. Alfredo Simon going up for Cincinnati again. Left-handed bats last year, 289 average against them, 154 WOBA, 16 home runs, and 106 innings pitched. Ooh, excuse me. The guy who stands out the most is Anthony Rizzo. 384 WOBA, 255 ISO score against, weak right-handed pitching. And he's actually hit Simon pretty well in his career. 5 for 15 lifetime with 2 home runs. So I think Rizzo is definitely one of those first base options, along with Goldie, that you really got to consider. There's about 4 or 5 of them, along with Encarnacion and Abreu, who we'll get to in a minute. There's a bunch of good first base options today. I don't think this is a day where you can afford to go cheap at first base. I definitely think you're going to need to pay up because 1 or 2 of these guys is just going to have a monster, like 25 to 35 fantasy point kind of game. And if you choose the wrong one, it's probably going to affect your, where you wind up at the end of the night in some of these tournaments. So definitely like Rizzo, definitely think he's in play. And honestly, though, he's pretty much the only one. I don't really love a lot of the other bats here. Hayward, Zobrist haven't really done much against Simon in his career. Simon actually looked okay in his first game. I was expecting him to get lit up. I think we actually talked about stacking bats against him, and he came out and, kind of looked like that guy from 2 or 3 years ago that was just mowing people down and came out of nowhere. So I haven't been able to get this guy right in a while. The only thing I do know is that Anthony Rizzo is in a great spot here today. So he's the only bat that I'm going to give my stamp of approval to, at least up at the high end. But you would think that a lot of these other left-handed guys that the Chicago Cubs have in their lineup would be in good spots as well. Although it hasn't proven it in the past, I definitely think that you can look that way because it has been what Alfredo Simon has struggled with. Now, on the other side of this game, we got John Lackey. Left-handed bats are the way to attack him. 271 average, 1.44 whip last season. So Joey Votto's the guy who stands out. 423 WOBA, 235 ISO. Hasn't really been all that great this year, but lifetime against Lackey, he's 3 for 12, but 2 of those 3 hits have been for home runs. So just keep that in mind when you're filling out your team. If you're looking for some other left-handed bats, I was looking at the top of that order. Cozart, Suarez haven't really done much against them. Jay Bruce has been a typical Jay Bruce thing. I think he had a home run or 2, also had like 4 or 5 strikeouts and like a 250 batting average. So, it's basically typical Jay Bruce. If you're willing to roll with that, I think he's in a decent spot as a left-handed bat going up against Lackey. But again, it's not something that, I'm going to run out and put on my cash game teams. He's more of a hit or miss kind of guy. Next game we talk about, Chicago White Sox against the Minnesota Twins. Carlos Rodon going up for the White Sox. Left-handed bats, he's been lights out against left-handed bats. Last year, they only hit 194 against him with a whip of 108. So I'm not really looking at any left-handed bats on this Minnesota team, which is good because they don't really have a ton of them anyway. Right-handed bats, probably the way you want to go. 272 batting average, 159 whip against him last year. So the one guy who stands out the most to me is Miguel Sano. I actually like him in righty-on-righty matchups as well, but even against a left-handed pitcher, 379 WOBA, 235 ISO score over the course of the last season and a half. 1 for 2 with a home run against Rodon, too. So he has seen him before, and he has proven that he can hit him hard because he took him deep last year. Obviously, 2 at-bats, not a huge sample size, but it is always nice to see that, a guy was able to get a hit and take the pitcher that he's facing to their yard. The only other guy that I'm really looking at on this Minnesota team, and remember, this Minnesota offense has been horrible. They've been they've been an offense that we've been targeting against all year, let alone trying to take them. So, I have absolutely no problems going against this offense. But Trevor Plouffe would be the only other guy in this offense that I would probably take a look at. Right-handed batter, cleanup hitter, probably hitting either in front of or behind Sano, depending on how they do it. Those are really the only 2 guys that I'd want to use to attack Rodon. I think he's in a decent spot here as a pitcher today as well. And I'm looking forward to reading up Josh's thoughts on him because I think he might be one of those guys that I'm looking to use on my tournament rosters and maybe even in my cash games today. The other side of this game, we got Phil Hughes. Phil Hughes, who allowed left-handed hitters to hit 282 against him last year, allowed right-handed hitters to hit 304. Actually had a pretty good first start this season, but the thing about Hughes is he gave up 29 home runs in 155 innings. So this is a guy that people have been teeing off on. He's an extreme fly ball pitcher. It's been his problem his entire career. So there are a lot of home runs that you can look for in games that Phil Hughes is on the mound. To me, that means that the one guy that stands out, a guy who hits well in righty on righty and has home run power, Jose Abreu, 384 WOBA, 240 ISO score, 7 of 21 lifetime against Phil Hughes. He hasn't taken Hughes deep, but he has hit him pretty hard. He does have a bunch of doubles in there. And again, a 333 batting average, and he does profile as the kind of guy that Phil Hughes would struggle with. The only other bat I'd really look at is left-hander Adam Eaton up at the top of that order. 367 WOBA, 179 ISO score. So I think he could be in play. I don't know how many at-bats Todd Frazier has against Hughes in his career, but Frazier's not really a great righty-on-righty hitter. Although with Hughes struggling against right-handed bats and Frazier having some power and hitting from the right side, he's an intriguing option as well that I think you can look at. But it would only be for a GPP for me. You know, Abreu, I think, is a guy you can use in GPPs or cash. Adam Eaton, somebody who I'm not going to have much exposure to. But, you know, again, if you need a cheap outfield option, I do think he's in a decent spot here against Hughes. So we got 2 games left here to talk about. Baltimore and Boston is the next one. Ubaldo Jimenez is going up there. And I think people are getting a little excited about Ubaldo. He did very well at home last year, was not all that great on the road. So him going up and pitching in Boston is not really something that I want to target. He had reverse splits last year as well. Right-handed bats 290 with the 152. Left-handed bats only hit 220 against him last year with a 121 whip, but he did have a high home run rate against the left-handed bats. So, you know, again, when you're talking about high home run rates and left-handed bats going up against right-handed pitching on the Boston Red Sox, David Ortiz is a guy that stands out. 413 WOBA, 320 ISO. We talked about him yesterday. He made us look good going yard, and I think it was either his first or second at-bat. Didn't do a ton else. He didn't have a huge score yesterday, but anytime you can get a home run out of somebody, it's always nice. So he paid off pretty well. I did have him on a couple tournament rosters, and I actually had him on one of my 2 cash game rosters yesterday, and the one that did wind up getting above the 50-50 line. So I was pretty happy about that. On the other side of this game, we have Joe Kelly. Now, Joe Kelly is a hard-throwing right-hander. Right-handed bats have hit 299 against him last year with a 162 whip. Left-handers hit 254 with the 129 whip. So Manny Machado is probably the guy that profiles best with his 384 WOBA and 232 ISO. I don't think he had great numbers against Kelly, but I think it was limited at bats because I didn't write it down, and it's not something that I'm really too worried about. But I do think Machado is somebody that I would look at here. He obviously is expensive, and if you're going to pay up that kind of money, I'd rather just go up to a guy like Arenado. But again, he's somebody else you can look at if you're trying to find a swerve for a tournament. Chris Davis still in play again as well. 410 WOBA, 350 ISO. Had an okay game yesterday. I was expecting a little more out of him. Had a couple walks, had a hit. I think he might have even had an RBI or so. Wound up with about 10 fantasy points, which is okay. But I was expecting a little more production out of him. He's in a good spot here against Kelly as well. He's 4 for 7 lifetime against Kelly with 2 walks. So he has a .666 on base percentage against them. 4 for 7 batting. So he's batting over 500 against them in his limited appearances. So I do think Davis is somebody that's in play, another guy that we can continue to look at. If you want to go and really stack bats up against Kelly, if you're not a big fan, you can get a guy like Joey Rickert, who's been batting at the top of the order. There's a couple other guys like, I think Trumbo's in there, and, a couple other guys that they have that you can look at. I'm not really a huge fan of targeting against Kelly, but Boston is a place where we do tend to see some runs. You get to see a lot of, 5-6, 6-5 kind of games where it goes back and forth a little bit. So if you wanted to target some guys in this Baltimore-Boston game, it would have been a decent thing to do yesterday. You would have got a lot of runs out of it. And with Ubaldo and Kelly on the mound, I think we get a decent amount of runs out of it again here today. So that brings us to the last game we have to look at. Cleveland Indians against the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, or actually just the Tampa Bay Rays at this point. Carlos Carrasco was pitching for Cleveland. He gave up about a 107 whip to right and left-handed bats last year. Lefties hit 216. Righties actually hit him a little bit better at 238. Neither one of those numbers is all that great, though, although I do think it is the way it goes. Carrasco also had a little bit of a reverse splits thing going on in 2014, so right-handed batters do tend to do a little better against him, and he's very, very tough on lefties, even though he's a right-handed pitcher. I mean, I'm looking down at this Tampa Bay team. If you want to attack them with righties, I guess you're looking at guys like, Forsythe and Longoria. Forsythe had the home run yesterday, but neither one of them really stand out to me as being good options. If you want left-handed bats, maybe a guy like Corey Dickerson. But again, even though he's hitting cleanup for this team, it's not like I think he's a great option. He is kind of cheap. I just really don't want to take too many bats against Carrasco. Hank Conger is somebody that you can look at as well. He had a 382 WOBA and a 260 ISO score against right-handed pitching last year. Maybe if you need a cheap catcher option, but, I think you have other guys that we talked about, a guy like Castro, a couple other catcher options like Castillo, who was in that same $3,000 to $3,300 price range. I like those guys a ton better than I like Conger. And, even Dickerson is not really somebody that I'm looking to target. So Carrasco to me is probably the number one option pitching wise on the board. He's obviously the most expensive. I think he's almost $12K today. I don't know how much usage I'll have out of him because of that price range, but I definitely do think it's a good spot for him and not a very good spot for the Rays bats. On the other side of that game, we got Drew Smyly, the left-hander, going for Tampa Bay against Cleveland. Now, this Cleveland offense isn't all that great. Right-handed bats are the way we usually like to attack Smyly. 249 batting average, 126 whip. Did give up 11 home runs to right-handers in 51 innings. There's really only two guys on Cleveland that are standing out to me right now because it's not a very good offense. You got Francisco Lindor, who's a shortstop batting third, which is what I really like about him. Had a home run yesterday, 381 WOBA, 200 whip against left-handed pitch. 200 ISO against left-handed pitching. So as far as cheap shortstop options go, I think Lindor is up there towards the top of the list. Him and Seager are the two guys that I've kind of been deciding on a lot of my rosters. I think both guys are safe for cash. I think both guys are in play for tournaments. Like I said, Smyly, not the greatest against right-handed bats. Lindor hitting third, one of the few shortstops that you get hitting right in the heart of that order. The other guy you can look at is Mike Napoli. He's a cheap option at first base. Like I said, I think there's so many stud first basemen, and at least one or two of them is going to go off for a big number today that I don't think I want to save there. But if you do need to save at the position, Napoli had a 403 WOBA and a 285 ISO score against left-handed pitching last year. So he's probably the best right-handed bat going up against the lefty Smyly. The game is in Tampa Bay, not really the greatest hitter's ballpark. So again, I'd be willing not to target anybody on this, on this Cleveland team. But if I'm targeting anybody, those are the two guys that kind of stand out to me in that lineup. So that pretty much wraps it up here for our Benny's Bat section for Wednesday. Like I said, it is a big night out there. We got a lot of games going on. It's April 13th. It's like the first big Wednesday we have. Pretty sure there's 12 games for the night slate today. So there are a lot of different options, a lot of different ways you can go, which is good because even the chalk isn't going to be as chalky when you have this many teams playing. And anything that you decide to swerve off of the chalk onto is probably going to be much lower owned than it would be on a 6 or 7 game slate. So a lot of big tournaments out there, a lot of money to be won. Good luck tonight, everybody. And as always, stay classy, DFS.